Your alternative talk radio contact, The Planet, KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complaisance, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Quickening, Art Bell was right.
Dude, yeah, I'm like waiting for the old ones to just come popping up. At least we get them on film, you know?
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, get to them first.
What was I going to ask you? Hey, was it the Halloween hangout that we were all on together, or was it one of the auxiliaries? I was trying to go through my website, and I was like, what episode was that? Like there was
I think it was the Halloween episode.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering. I was trying to make notes, and because I know that you and Kai, of course, the last time you guys were like on a featured episode, you and your brother Kai came on. It was episode 58. So I was like trying to go through the website. I'm horrible about that stuff, and I'm like, was that like an end of the random? Was it a Halloween thing? And I'm okay, confirmed. Halloween hangout. I will link that in the show notes for everybody.
Oh, funny. I haven't listened to that forever. I wonder what it's like. Probably pretty awesome.
Well, yeah, and it's that random stuff is just so fun. And in fact, I was just talking to somebody last week or the week before, and I made a post today just saying, hey, would you guys be interested in me putting together another roundtable type of a situation? So it'd be pretty cool to get you back on for a roundtable, and maybe go ahead and grab Ryan and Sam or whoever we want and do a roundtable, because that was fun.
Yeah, it was totally fun. Yeah, just let me know. I'm down. I'm excited.
So, Euphomet is back out. In case everybody has not heard, this is of course Jim Perry, and as I mentioned before, you have heard him before here on Into the Fray, and he was featured on episode 58, and it was titled Eceti and the Fringe in Trout Lake, Washington. So that was you guys' first trip to Eceti, and then of course something that we're going to be discussing today is once again Eceti, because you've been back there. I wanted to ask you, because this happened after our talk. Sorry that I keep pausing. Everybody, my throat's a little screwed up right now. Clyde Lewis said he saw Bigfoot at Eceti. Had you heard about that?
I had heard about that. Yeah, I'm an avid listener of Clyde, actually, and considering he's from the Pacific Northwest, just like myself, we kind of speak the same language. So I've heard Clyde's blonde Bigfoot story about a dozen times, I think, on air. And each time I picture myself right in his place in that miniature apple orchard that sort of is flanked by the cabins there at Eceti. And I can see how something like that would happen there. It's a truly magical, interesting, confusing, frustrating place.
Yeah, so it seems. Everybody that I respect and that I know of and that are just as into this as I am keeps talking about Eceti, and I'm just kind of going, why haven't I not gone out there yet? And because it's something that you brought up straight away, and you sent me a list of things we could talk about, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I chose some, and one of the first things, of course, was your second trip to Eceti. So in case people are not aware of what and where Eceti is, can you just kind of give them a little background?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that are unacquainted, it's a camp and residence near the foothills of Mount Adams, and that's outside of Trout Lake, Washington. Eceti is known as an extreme hotspot for anomalous lights. It's known for Sasquatch, It's known for channeling. And it's one of those very special, weird places that actually lives up to expectations. Because each time I've gone to Eceti, I've told myself not to have any. Yet, you always do, of course, right? In the back of your head. And every time I'm blown away right after the visit.
Yeah, and that happened the first time, too. You guys were like, we weren't going in there excited, but yet all kinds of stuff was going on. So without going into a lot of detail, of course, because we already did on, again, iTF 58, go back, check it out. You guys can hear all the details of his first trip. But what was the gist of what was going on there for you guys that first time around?
Well, what was interesting about that trip is we essentially we saw a great deal of anomalous lights in the sky, in addition to lights on the mountain. These are lights that could not have been explained. These are lights that are there consistently almost every single night. They are lights in the sky that'll take crazy corners and accelerate at unreal speeds, will blink in and out, are sometimes in triangle formations, or sometimes different craft variety. And we saw a little of all of this. And, it was at that time that I actually had to step away from this work for a while to let it process. I didn't have a shattering in that moment, but it was a crack for sure. And I think it led me to where I'm doing now.
That was a perfect synopsis. So what is your opinion specifically on what a lot of people talk about out there, and that is the fact that you can actually basically call the craft?
That's really interesting, and I mean, if that's a thing that can happen, then there would be a place for that there.
Mm-hmm.
I would suspect. So this second time that I went out, I actually, because I had some of these questions of myself in regards to that exact question, right? So the second time I actually brought along my friend Tim Rothschild, and he's a non-dual Kabbalistic healer. And so his entire practice, his devotion in life is essentially mastering these non-dual Kabbalistic, shamanistic skill sets that allow him to receive messages from reality, essentially, right? Like tap into this greater consciousness and see what he can find from it. So I was fascinated to get his take on the alleged energies there. And we dug even deeper this time, Shannon, than I did last time. We attended all the seminars, all the lectures. We made ourselves available to essentially experience the entire gamut of what was offered there. And I think afterwards I was left with this broader sense of wonderment and kind of an appreciation for the human element in all of this, which I've discovered you can never really take away when you're being honest with yourself about some of this activity. We did a light language ritual. We did table tipping. Of course, all of this with someone who is practicing, this rituals or these rituals on a routine basis. And, the idea is that others have profound spiritual connections that develop between them and alleged extraterrestrials and angels. But Tim and I, as really kind of indoctrinated as we are, seemingly, we just couldn't really open up all the way to it because it was too much. It's a deep well there. So.
So what is the part of his title that is, you said non-dual? Is that what you were saying? What does that mean?
So non-dualism is essentially a form of Kabbalistic teaching, and it breaks off from the standard Kabbalistic, shamanistic interpretation of how reality works. And one of the things that is expressed with non-dualism is the acceptance of ego, for example. It's using your ego as a tool to better understand what's going on in reality and the universe and your place in it. So it's not eliminating ego from yourself. It's being real with yourself, being real with the situation, using that as a lens, using your humanity really as a lens to decipher what these other codes are. So I would, I'm not an expert at it, but I would assume that like that's one of the major differences with non-dualism.
Right.
And within that, bringing someone like that to Eceti, I was ready to have them interpret it through their human shamanistic lens. And I think what we discovered again was there is some sort of exchange. There's a conversation happening there. I think that to answer your first question, yeah, there seemingly is an exchange of energies between the people down on the ground and the alleged craft above. Whatever this light is, whatever this energy is, there's almost a I don't know, like a clarion call of sorts happening on the ground where people are ready to accept this and they are calling in, they are manifesting some of this energy to them perhaps. So I even experienced myself, but in like an embarrassing way that I don't mind sharing with you and your audience because we go way back.
Well, sure, if you don't mind.
So by the end of day one, I was ready for something big to happen. Although I knew I shouldn't, of course, have expectations, and I was even a complete fool about it in front of my friend. When I woke up in the middle of the night, in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, I had this steely blue light covering my face from the window, and I hopped up and I saw this, I don't know, this crystalline spherical object staring back at me from the trees. And so I immediately, this is a matter of seconds, I yelled at Tim and he jolted up and I was like, Tim, what's that? And Tim rustles out of bed real quick and he stares at the ball of light and he goes, the moon?
He's like, Jim, you woke me up for the moon, man?
Yeah. And so that was a thing that happened. And so, I am not one to usually jump to sort of sensationalized conclusions or think that every bump in the night is a ghost or every shadow is a shadow figure, right? Or a shadow creature. So for me to be in a mindset where I allowed myself the possibility that whatever light was shining through the window to be some alleged craft, to be something else, I think was just an illustration to me. I think it was a lesson in some way that, hey, it's very easy to start to believe a lot of things here. And I think it starts with the people that are there. I think it starts with how warm and accepting everyone really is. And you start thinking about the lore associated with this place. And you could start thinking about Clyde Lewis's Bigfoot that he sees. And you start thinking about these stories and you go, well, if this is true, then why can't this be true too? Right? And so, extremely warm folks doing some very deep work there. And it's a deep work that I think if you just go for fun, because it is just a normal campground too, like anyone can go. You can go online and book your campsite, right? Just like a KOA. And I think for those meandering into this other space of very high strangeness, of very deep extraterrestrial human ideology about our relationship or assumed relationship, I think most people would be stunned by it. And I think it's a deep work that really needs to be considered and respected. And I just wasn't in the place, like as a human being at that time, and neither was my shaman friend. We were neither of us were in the place to accept Palladians being our star family at that point.
Yeah,
right?
And that's the guy to take, right? Like Tim would be the guy to take. I mean, that would be a proper choice, and you executed that choice. And so for, I think, probably maybe even you kind of going, oh, well, not even Tim's ready for this. I mean, did that make you feel better, or did that make you feel like we humans are way far away from anything that we need to be as far as accepting this stuff?
I mean, I think it convinced me, or maybe it verified what my assumption was. In particular, the phenomenon with the paranormal and our humane everyday lives is that we all live in our own reality. in some sense. We all have standards and norms, practices, rituals, beliefs that to us are very normal, right? But to other people are not at all. And I think that the paranormal fits very well into this. And there are standard beliefs about, well, for someone, it's not uncommon for them to be like, oh, well, my mom came to me in a dream last night and she told me that, don't drive on the I-90 bridge or whatever. And that was like, oh yeah, maybe that's true, but it was a normal experience to have. It was within the realm, I don't know, of consigned belief. Well, for some of these folks, it's just as normal for them, or they've developed these sort of norms in terms of their belief patterns, that something like communicating through light language, which is essentially a form of speaking in tongues that is channeled from extraterrestrial ancestors, is also just as normal, right? So I think it really helped me set up what my next stage of my career in this field was. And that was looking more closely at the personal relationships and the personal stories related to the supernatural and the paranormal and the fringe, and not worrying so much about what the actual phenomenon is, but really worrying about the person.
Robinhood is an investing app that lets you buy and sell stocks, ETFs, options, and cryptos, all commission-free. While other brokerages charge up to $10 for every trade, Robinhood doesn't charge any commission fees, so you can trade stocks and keep all of your profits. Plus, there is no account minimum deposit needed to get started, so you can start investing at any level. The simple, intuitive design of Robinhood makes investing easy for newcomers and experts alike. View easy-to-understand charts and market data, and place a trade in just 4 taps on your smartphone. You can also view stock collections, such as 100 most popular. With Robinhood, you can learn how to invest in the market as you build your portfolio. Discover new stocks, track your favorite companies, and get custom notifications for price movements so you never miss the right moment to invest. Robinhood is giving listeners of Into the Fray a free stock, like Apple, Ford, or Sprint, to help build your portfolio. Sign up at thefray.robinhood.com. No, I like that idea because we've always been chasing our tails with stuff like that. As fun as the chase is, it's very exciting. But okay, so Jim, for you, then are you kind of hinting that most all of this does tie back into our own consciousness?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I say I don't know a lot nowadays because I don't know what I believe anymore.
Yeah.
And I've had to come to terms over the last year, essentially, with that feeling. It's affected my work. It's affected my life, and in positive ways, I think. But whatever the case is, there is something perhaps to our ability to find identities within the unknown, within the paranormal. I think folks can find places for themselves in this. They can find a home. They can find a refuge. So I think that's important. I think that affects our consciousness because our consciousness dictates our place really in the universe and what we think about ourselves. And so that certainly does that. Now, when it comes to like greater sort of implications per our consciousness, whether it's a shared consciousness or how does it affect the paranormal, in sort of infinitum, those are the big questions, right? Those are the questions that we're all kind of chasing a little bit. That's the idea of like, is God real? That's the question of what happens when we die. Those are all the same questions, kind of, if you really think about it. And I think those are the profound questions that we create. Let's not say create, but we find ways to move through and to swim through reality, right? That is copacetic to maybe what our belief systems are, maybe how our ego or our identity likes to be seen. And then we go, well, this is my way to swim through this reality, right? All's to say is, again, like, I don't know. I don't know what I believe anymore, Shannon.
No, I knew you took a break from Euphomet for a good reason. I was just kind of like waiting for it. I'm like, Jim's going to come back with all of the answers to everything.
Well, here's the thing. Is I came back even like more confused, but more excited.
Yeah.
When I came back, it was for the launch of Euphomet. It was picked up by a network. And by the time I was out on the road for months on end, I mean, I was not home last year at all. I was out recording the first season of Euphomet everywhere. And I was sleeping on people's couches that had experienced crazy stuff. And I was out in the woods of West Virginia. And I was places that I had no business being, really.
Yeah.
And being treated with a grace and a kindness from folks and an access, a privileged access to some of these stories and some of these individuals and some of these tales that we've heard our entire lives. And I was graced with the opportunity to be a steward of some of these stories. And when you're out on the road and you're 3 weeks into like a 4-week trip straight on the road without being home, and you start questioning your ability to process some of this phenomenon that you're experiencing firsthand now, you can't give up at that point. You can't say, well, this is too weird, I'm going home. Because at that point, well, this is your job now, man. So you have to do
you're
it.
Stuck.
Yeah, you're stuck. And you're stuck like really rectifying your place in all of this.
Yeah.
And figuring out how you navigate through that.
Okay, so before I go on with my questions here, so that people can go ahead and look you up right now, let them know where they can go to find the revamp of Euphomet.
Yeah, you can go to euphomet.com. It's EUPHOMET. And you can also find Euphomet on social media, of course, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just at Euphomet. And you can find me at It's Jim Perry on Twitter and Instagram. And those are the best ways to find it. You can search for the show on Apple Podcasts. You can listen there or listen essentially anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Have you and Tim ever talked about maybe taking something like DMT, dimethyltrexate, or, something like that where people claim that it will open up certain kind of receptors that are normally closed off, and then you can talk to the other beings, or you can be more open to seeing maybe what's right on the other side, and people have admitted that it can be a very terrifying experience. But is that something that you've ever thought about doing, or that has Tim ever brought anything like that up?
Tim has. Tim's experimented with all sorts of things, and with great result. And those are for sure his stories to tell. But for me personally, I'd never do it. First of all, I'm straight edge, so that eliminates a lot of things.
Yeah.
Secondly, the Newkirks and I talk about this technique, and for people that I'm sure most people listening to this are familiar with the Newkirks. Just put out a great documentary called Hell online, available for everyone to watch, and they run a traveling museum, which I can talk about a little bit later. But we talk about this often, and that's 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? That's very important to me. And I think that if I were to dive into hallucinogenics, even with the utmost respect, even if I'm in Central America and I'm with a real shaman and he is respectively, dosing me with ayahuasca in some sort of sweat tent, and and I'm talking with, the Anunnaki or something at that point. I don't think I could do it, because I think for me, I think what my role in this is to tell the stories, and it's to experience enough to give anecdotal insight, but I need to find my way back home so that I can tell those stories in a way that's palatable to people, that are exciting, that are real, that are emotional and resonate with people. And for that, I have to be accountable. I got to show up. I got to be here for people, I think.
It's a good answer. Okay, so the table tipping you brought up, that you said you went Eddy said you guys sat down, did some table tipping. So who or what were they trying, or were you guys trying to get in touch with during this table tipping scenario?
So this was the first table tipping I had ever been a part of. I had, of course, seen it, heard about it, read about it for so long. And, listen, like the turn of the century, it was a popular form of divination. Occultists, amateur occultists, these swinging parties. You see all these black and white photographs of this table tipping happening right before some ectoplasm comes out of some part of the body, right? So it wasn't that.
Wait, no ectoplasm came out of your nose, Jim?
Nothing like that happened, unfortunately. I was waiting for it. But it was mysterious, and it did set the tone for the rest of the weekend, as this was one of the first things that we engaged with. And there was a woman that was a part of it. James Gilliland was there, and a few other folks that were working on the property, as well as, I think, one other person that was actually staying there. We were really lucky. We went there during a time where there was hardly anyone there at all. I think there was 3 other people total that was staying at the camp. So because of our role in content and media, James was familiar with some of our work. So we're the people that work there. So we were really lucky that they gave us a lot of great access. Had dinner with them, things like this. But at that point, everyone was new, and everybody was just a different face staring back at us, like wondering what our deal was. And as soon as the ritual began, the tipping started to occur. The trance-like states seemed to start to befall upon people's faces. Chanting began. And at that point, alleged channeling started to happen. And this was not just of the extraterrestrial variety, this was the angelic variety as well. This was, Mother Mary. This was the Palladians. It was a mix of angelic and extraterrestrial ancestors that were coming through this woman. At that point, I noted I was not able to be there. Tim and I both, I think, it's hard to explain unless you've been in a situation like that for the first time, around a lot of people that are very into it, doing deep work. Then it's much like being in someone else's house while you're watching them have sex or something. I don't know how to, I haven't done that, but it's hard to describe that sort of innate emotionality to it.
Yeah.
Where
it's almost too voyeuristic.
Yeah.
So personal.
Yeah, it's so personal.
So you guys actually had to get up and leave? No. We sat there. Okay.
But my mind was somewhere else. My mind was going, this is wild. There was I don't want to divulge too much about everyone that was there, but there were individuals there that were going through profound tragedies in their life, extreme life changes, and they were seeking. And you could tell to them they were beginning to find some solace in this place. They were beginning to find some sort of connection, just like you'd see with someone engaging with a medium perhaps for the first time, or other forms of divination, right? The woman who burst out in tears because it's the first time she heard from her dead mother through a tarot reading, right? Like a 3-card pull. It's those situations where when you're the outsider, when you are kind of that voyeur, you have to remind yourself that if you're in Tim and I situation, we were there trying to be a part of it and understand and be grounded in that. But you feel like a fake. You feel like you shouldn't be there. You feel like, like boundaries? Am I like doing something wrong by being here right now?
Right. That would definitely be how I felt.
Yeah. So I hope that I hope people can understand that way that I'm explaining it, because I've never vocalized it before, I don't think.
No, and I appreciate you doing that here. So what are your final thoughts? You and Tim both. I mean, do you feel like that was amazing? You've already been there, but are you going back again? You guys going back to Eceti?
I would like to go back. I've still never created an actual audio documentary around it. And considering that's all I do with Euphomet now, it needs one. It's just the problem with it is it's such a loaded place. There's so much going on, and I would expect actually it would be a great Euphomet episode because of the human element that exists there already, and that you have a lot of personality and you have a lot of connection from the human element trying to connect with something outside of itself. And that's a really honest and noble pursuit that I think that place is about. I think that place is about reaching out as much as it is receiving what is happening. And obviously it's resonating in some sort of cosmic sense because there are things that happen there that no one can explain. So yeah, Shannon, I recommend you go there.
Yeah, definitely.
You just have to see it for yourself. And now that, I haven't talked about Eceti in a while, now you're like, I'm getting charged right now just thinking about it. And I feel like I need to go back now to see after, I will mention this. The first time I went there, it was so much to take in. It was so much birthday cake that I had to step away from the table for a while. The second time I went there, I was left with so many questions and so many questions about myself and my place in this world, right? The third time I go back, it'll be a completely different situation because since then, I've gone on to experience more strange things than I ever encountered at Eceti by far, and more situations in my life that I've completely had to rectify with in terms of what my beliefs are or what they're not, and what really could be happening out here with the paranormal.
I mean, how does James, how is he physically there that much? And being around a place like that that's so intense. I mean, he has to have some serious control or ways to shut it off, or maybe he just takes it in all the time, 24/7. I don't know.
Well, it occurs to me that James is not unlike some of these other old heads that are the folks that we used to listen to on Coast to Coast with our bell, right?
Yeah.
You hit a certain point, I think, where that's you. I had the experience with Peter Gersten during the taping of Euphomet, and he's a guy, one of these old heads that Peter's just Peter now. And Peter he was the UFO lawyer, and now he's the vortex jumper, and it's all him 100% of the time. And he is just signed up for that. I would like to say that these folks are living like a really honest life within themselves and what their beliefs are, right? For me, it's too much personally for what I would want to accomplish. Again, like I like to stick by the belief of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I feel like there's been so many folks within the paranormal, folks within the metaphysical, within the occult and the esoteric, that we see what happens when they just go too far. And it certainly happens. So I would assume that that's the situation for James, perhaps. We had an interesting conversation with him about the level of energy and how intense it was. And I think it was him responding to probably like a offhanded comment, like sort of a joke that either Tim and I mentioned. And that was, I think we were commenting on how heavy the place was. And that, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on here all the time. And you have a lot of personalities here. in various levels of, belief, of involvement in this, right? How does one live through that every single day? And, his answer was essentially like, well, most don't. Yeah. Most can't stand to be here very long. We have a lot of people that come in, they're here for maybe 2 months, 3 months at the most, and then they're gone. And I think that if I were to go back now to Eceti, I would imagine that James would be there and maybe one or two other people, and everybody else would be gone. They would be all new folks. And I think it's one of those places, and we see it as an example in other hot spots, right? Where it's also the case, where the energy's there, where whatever work is going on is so deep and profound, most people just have to tap out at some point.
All right. Well, moving away from Eceti, and you actually brought this up, vortexes. Let's move to the vortex in Arizona. What's that all about?
Yeah. So, again, here's another place that is loaded and is such a hot spot for anomalous activity. And this is a place that actually has, and I'm not real read up on this, but a lot of ancestral lore about how this place, Sedona, Arizona, how this spot in the desert, how these red rock mountains act as extremely powerful vortexes. And that if the power is accessed in certain ways, they can be used to gain information, insight, to essentially open portals, right? So I was down there to meet with Peter Gersten, and you remember Peter Gersten, right?
Yes.
So he was the UFO lawyer, and I just put together a sort of a retrospective on his work in the UFO field for the last Obscura episode. It was Euphomet Obscura episode 2, which can be found on the feed right now. And it's essentially a retrospective of his career in the UFO field. I mean, you're talking about the guy was the first guy to sue the federal government for information on UFOs. He worked with all the greats of the time, Jacques Vallée. He worked with J. Allen Hynek. And he worked with regular folks that had experiences with anomalous lights and activities and UFOs. These were citizens of the United States. These were normal people. These were farmers. These were also high-ranking military officials. These were also pilots in the Air Force that all came together and said, listen, there's something going on here, but we're not getting any answers. There's things that are happening to us. We're, having these effects after having these sightings. You have a carload of people in the Midwest that, have a sighting with an anomalous light and all start getting cancer. Well, what's going on here? So, Peter was a guy who kind of came in, like he wouldn't say this, but he kind of came in on a white steed and was able to start chipping away at the infrastructure of the government. And based off some of the information, some of the case files that he got, he was able to subpoena the federal government and the CIA to then release a ton of documents. We're talking about like 900 documents or something like that had never been released before. I could be off on that number, but I think that's probably pretty close. And because of that, we have information on things like the Tehran UFO incident and just several others, like really amazing cases that we would really never have known about before. So he was a big deal. He was a big deal in the UFO community. Mm-hmm. But now Peter's kind of adopted a new nickname, and that's of the Vortex Jumper. And that's because he essentially believes that he's in his own game, that he's in his own virtual reality show, and that with the help of things like synchronicities, numbers, signs, he's interpreted messages from this game, and he's on a mission. So in 2011, he got this message that he was to take 1,111 people to the top of Bell Rock, which is this monumental red rock located in Sedona. And he was supposed to take them up there by December 21st, 2012, by 11:11 p.m. So what was supposed to happen is upon completing this task, a vortex or a mothership or some other cosmic event would occur at the top of the mountain, and the vortex jumper, Peter, would make the leap into this. So you got to understand that,
I didn't realize that. I knew that he was the UFO lawyer. I didn't put his name with the whole Bell Rock vortex incident. I did not know that was the same guy.
That's right. The same guy.
I forgot his name for the vortex thing. Okay, because, so the 1,111 people would go to the top of the rock with him, but he was the only one that was going to jump in?
Yeah, because what would essentially happen and what his path to getting that many people on the top of the Bell Rock is he actually started taking them up one by one or by small groups. And he would do this by opening up his couch to couch surfers. And the requirement was, well, if you're going to stay on my couch, you need to come to the top of Bell Rock with me. And that's how he amassed the amount of people. So although he made like a really strident effort, he didn't complete the challenge, essentially. And at that same time, he had convinced everyone that he was going to jump off the mountain, whether there was a vortex or not. So on that night, on the top of the mountain, it was essentially flanked by police and onlookers. There was a helicopter kind of circling the mountaintop. And they thought this man was going to jump. He didn't jump. He didn't jump to a vortex or to his death or anything like that. He actually just climbed down.
But was that only because the cops were there?
He climbed down because the vortex didn't happen. He didn't have enough people up at the top in time.
Okay.
So he didn't complete his mission. And so it was kind of, for him at that point, he thought it was game over. But that was until new signs. He started getting new symbols and messages. He received these, and new goals were essentially put into place for him. So he generously continued leading climbers up to Bell Rock. He started the top of the Bell Rock Club, which was really admirable because he's essentially just a free tour guide now for people, a really experienced free tour guide.
Yeah.
But one of the qualifications for me getting the interview with him, the first thing he said on Facebook was, "Well, you got to come to the top of Bell Rock." And so I said, "Yeah, sure, yeah, that's fine." And then you get there, and you're faced with 8-foot straight inclines, and you're asked to climb this gigantic red rock. And let's just say I'm not a member of the Top of the Bell Rock Club.
Hey, guess what? That would be me too, because I don't know. I'm not afraid of heights per se, but there's something about rock climbing and just knowing that if one wrong move, because I'm a klutz anyway, and then I could break my neck and fall however many feet, it really freaks me out.
Yeah, and I'm such a klutz too. It would have been, I really was at that point where I'd made it most of the way up. I was almost at the top. My producer, Chelsea, she made it to the top. They had a great interview up there, and then we went back to his apartment, and we talked all day.
Okay, so he still was, it's not like you didn't climb up, so he's like, "Jim, you are banished. I will never speak to you again." It was just kind of like, you showed up, you put the effort in, so.
Exactly. He saw my intent was where it needed to be, and he saw I was a fanboy from the Art Bell days, and so it was a really interesting moment just being in his living room, going over his scrapbook of all the articles about his UFO days and then about his vortex jumping days, and it was really inspiring because, again, we're talking about someone that for sure has committed to their own reality, but it's a reality in which he's helping people expose themselves to essentially challenges they never thought they'd be able to accomplish, right? He is, I don't know, he's doing a service, and he's such a warm old guy.
Did you guys broach, the subject of what people say about him, as far as the naysayers and the super skeptics, or just, your average Joe that's like, that just sounds like complete bollocks?
Yeah, I did ask him about that. He does not care. He doesn't care at all. And it's not hyperbole when he says it either. He really does not care what people think about him. In fact, he's of mind that whatever they're saying is serving whatever they're trying to get out of the situation. Whatever they're saying about him is a reflection of what they really are, perhaps. And yeah.
Is he of the mind that, is he working towards, I should say, the fact that he has another task to where there will be another portal that's going to open up?
You know, he was, and it's interesting because I need to catch up with Peter again, because unfortunately his last task also bared no results. So his last task was to get a certain amount of people up to the top of Bell Rock by the end of last year. The exact date, I can't remember, but he did this time have enough people up. He did bring enough people up this time in the right amount of time. So unfortunately, you know, as you know, we would have heard if a giant mothership landed on the top of Bell Rock. It is not. But, you know, the thing with Peter is that, like, he is so resilient. And I think his experience of being a lawyer, an attorney, a criminal defense attorney, and you know, things like murder cases, I think it's allowed him to have a really good grasp of the humanity that's out there, right? The good and the bad. And yeah, I don't know. He's one of the, you know, let's just say this, like, I have a deep appreciation for him, and I may not agree with how much he may commit to certain ideas or notions, right? But it doesn't matter. It's not my life. And when he sent me a little birthday message on Facebook,
like, yes,
it was just one of those.
Cool.
I had to pinch myself, you know.
Cool.
Yeah. Again, can't separate the humanity from all this stuff.
No, absolutely not. No, especially not when people. Look, like you said, he's like top dog lawyer. He could be doing anything, making probably oodles and oodles of money, but instead he's traipsing up and down Bell Rock. I don't know how often he does it, but he's decided to do that. That's his passion. That is fascinating.
Yeah, I will mention that he's still doing it, of course. So, you know, I feel like if anybody has the inkling to go and test Bell Rocks themselves and meet Peter, I think he is available through Couchsurfing. So,
but you can't be a kind of sort of a height sissy like Jim and I. You might actually have to kind of enjoy that side of it. I'm not kidding. I would have done the same thing. I've tried to go out here in my backyard, and I didn't realize this until a couple years ago when I read it in a newspaper. It actually said that, and this might just be us patting our own backs, but I guess this area back here with my backyard per se, Red Rock and the Basin Range Mountains out by the town Blue Diamond is, like, I guess one of the top destinations in the country for rock climbers. And I'm talking about straight up the face, you know, you got the carabiners and tapping into the no thank you. $1 million I said, like, nope, I'm not doing it. People fall all the time out there, by the way. I mean,
yeah,
roped in
talk
or
about
not,
reality.
it's bad. Yeah, I'm constantly seeing the Bell 407 flying out there. I'm like, oh, some other freaking rock climber fell, because I just don't think it's very bright. I don't know why you want to do it.
Right.
But no, I'm not talking about the Bell Rock people, but these people, no, straight up some vertical face. You can have that all to yourself. You know, yep. I'm wondering though, you mentioned the mothership thing. I'm kind of wondering, maybe it did come. And then, you know, Peter turns around and then click, he does the flashy thing. Everyone's like, did you just flashy thing me, Peter? Nope, click. You know, they're doing the old Men in Black thing. It did come out there, Jim.
It's possible. Anything is possible.
Absolutely. That's for sure. I like the human side of things that you bring up, and people know that with my show and with your show, it's the same too. You know, I like to have one person on at a time, and sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 2 hours or more. And that's because I'm really coming from that place of, well, what did that do to you? You know, how did it change your thinking? How did you sleep for the next year after this or that happened? You know, because that's the stuff that really is fascinating, because even if you can't quite put your finger on what in the actual hell it was, it doesn't matter, because your life's changed.
Yep.
Speaking of this next thing that I've chosen out of your list, I'm kind of excited about, because I don't quite know what it's going to be. And so I'm very excited about this little snippet here that we're going to talk about next. And you mentioned something about Sasquatch and the secret code.
Yeah. So you loved this experience, first of all. It was a trip. It was a beautiful adventure in British Columbia, Canada. Up in the mountains, up in the foothills of these gorgeous, large, epic mountain systems. And I was there with my producer, Chelsea Weber Smith. We were with a man named Brian Bland. Now, Brian is a member of this community, this growing community that exists, and maybe you're familiar with them, of these experiencers of messages from alleged Sasquatch people by way of glyphs left for them on the forest floor, in the tree line, in all sorts of matter made from stone and sticks and twigs. And Brian was a member of this community. And so essentially it was Brian's belief that he was summoned for us by something. Once he started engaging with this energy, he started noticing these signs. And just like any other sort of divination, right? You're conscious of these signals that are coming your way, that you're receiving something. And so he started noticing these glyphs on the ground, and these glyphs they came to him in a very steady, consistent manner. And to him, it was almost as if it was language, and if it was a message that was needed to be communicated. Now, after he met up with some friends and some of the First Nations people of British Columbia that informed him that these were methods of communication that were known to their tribe, and that they're now essentially coming back with this form of communication, and they're doing it everywhere in the world now. And people online are communicating through Facebook groups and forums and the like, sharing these glyphs. And these glyphs essentially demonstrate names, warnings, messages. Now, of course, like, these are names, warning, messages that are attributed to them based on what the human interpretation is. But they've essentially they think they've narrowed down names. Like, this formation is for this name. This formation is for this Sasquatch family. And that these families occur all over the world. So we went up there, and Brian showed us glyphs. You know, I walked through the forest, and as we talked about his experience, and folks will have to listen to the episode to essentially get some of his more personal experiences, how it affected his life. But again, it was an interpretation of a very heartfelt communication. And it resonated with Brian, and it resonates with a lot of people. And it's certainly making a change to their life. They believe that these communications are from these Sasquatch people to essentially help raise our consciousness. They're not warnings to stay out of the forest. They're not warnings to, hey, get out of here, big giant X. These are subtle forms of communication. These are nudges that say, hey, we're here. This is who we are. We're here for you. So, of course, when you have interpretations that are like this, of this ilk, people start to bond to these messages. They start to feel like they're personalized, right? And that's the case here. That's what has happened with Brian. He's formed these personal relationships with these alleged Sasquatch families. And whether it's, to me, whether it's true or not doesn't matter. Whatever it is right now is helping people through their own stuff. And it's communicating a message that's very positive, right? So it is a it was an online community. It was just a community in general that I had no idea about before entering into this conversation with Brian and going up and spending time with him. And it's a community that I don't think is dissimilar to the myriad of sort of, I don't know, quote unquote fringe communities that are out there, essentially receiving signs and signals from all sorts of paranormal phenomenon and essentially building communities around this.
So if you are Brian Bland or any of the people that are in his group, do they actually have to go out into the forest to communicate with these beings, or could you like go in Brian's living room and sit down and then communicate with them?
For what I understand, they go out in the forest to have direct communication. Essentially, that is kind of like that's where you go to make art with them. You know, that's their home. However, Brian does share a story in the episode with me about receiving a glyph by the side of his car. What had happened, essentially, is after Brian's mom passed away, he was going through a stage of grief. And he was feeling at that point in time, you know, very down. You know, the loss was affecting him greatly. And he had not been out into the woods. He had not been out in the bush, as he would call it, for some time. And one morning, going to his car, he notices something on the driver's side, below the driver's side door. After further inspection, it was a glyph that is mostly associated with the alleged leader of the Sasquatch family he communicates with, this individual they call Ari. And it was Ari's sign. And it was at his door in his driveway. And, you know, Brian is, when he's telling me the story, he's weeping at this point. And he just says that it meant so much to him that they care about him like he's family. And that was them saying, hey, we're sorry. You know, we're sorry and we're here for you. And so, you know, this is Brian's truth, right? This is his experience. This is his reality, right? And in this reality, in his story, in his experience, he has built this familiar, deep relationship with these creatures, with this family, with this energy, and they've come to him now. So it's not just happening in the forest anymore; they're coming to him, and I think that's pretty profound.
Do you have an example of maybe what one of the glyphs looks like, if you could describe one?
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar to what you'd see in sort of Native American doilies and things of this nature, sort of Dreamcatcher-esque. You know, they vary in terms of complexity, but they can be as simple as, you know, two twigs in the formation of a letter form, to a myriad of, you know, twigs and vine and sticks and moss. But essentially, these are glyphs that, to the experiencer, are interpreted as something very, very purposeful. That they were built with intent. That they were specific to whatever message was coming across. And to me, I mean, just in all honesty, and it was a part of the process I had to go through with creating this episode, and kind of what my take on the story was. To me, I could go out there and make those. Like anybody could go out and just make this stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's a part of the question. And we're not even talking about, you know, you know more about this than me, but the phenomenon where there's bent trees that are, you know, built into shapes and teepee-like, you know, sort of like things that a human being, it would be very hard for them to go and construct themselves, right? That's not this. This phenomenon, it is possible for someone to make them. And in fact, the evidence online, the anecdotal evidence online for what people are finding, which is shared publicly on essentially a lot of Facebook groups, as they would, right?
Mm-hmm.
Vary. The spectrum varies to. I think, and there's a lot of dispute within that community, of course, too. There's a lot of figureheads that have already developed in that community of folks that are, maybe have had more experiences than others, have maybe had a higher level of glyph communication, perhaps. And they're in these message boards and they're policing, or they're instructing others that, hey, well, that doesn't really look like one. It should look a little bit more like this, or hey, this could be this. So we're not talking about a phenomenon that really is something that could not be man-made. But I think what the special part of this is whatever that assumed relationship is between this seemingly very docile product, right? And what its implications could be. And that's what's interesting to me. I remember Brian told me, he said, so the next time you're out in your woods, make sure to look down. Make sure to look down. I haven't done that yet. I haven't looked down. I've been on a few hikes. I still haven't looked. I think a part of me, I don't know, sometimes maybe I just want to disconnect. And that's what those walks are for, right?
I'll find out where you walk, and I'll just send some things that look exactly like the glyphs out of the Blair Witch Project. How about that?
Right, exactly. And I think your description is apt. That's very similar. I'm curious if you have had any experiences with this community, and if you've had any experiences with glyph-like objects like this.
The glyphs, no. It's actually a newer portion of this for me. And actually, on my very last episode, I find that one interesting, Jim. I'd like to get your take. I had Christopher S. Jacobs on, and he says that he can do basically exactly what Brian Bland is doing and his group, and that is talk with the Sasquatch. I wanted to see if you asked Brian this, or if you just got the gist of what they actually think these things are. Are they flesh and blood that just have extra abilities? Or can they go from looking flesh and blood to being invisible, which is probably, to them what they really are. They're just other entities. And that's what Christopher S. Jacobs basically said. They just happen to be here. They're other entities. They're not what we think they are based on what they look like.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, yeah, interesting. And that would dovetail into a lot of what I've read, being the more Native American, sort of understanding of what some of these creatures are in terms of maybe their ability to shapeshift, or they naturally are something else. What's interesting about Brian's interpretation, and I think his read from the greater community, even though I don't think he was speaking for everyone in that community, but my read is that they believe that Sasquatch is both flesh and blood and something else. That he is flesh and blood, yet possesses perhaps enhanced spiritual abilities. Brian did have, on top of his experiences with the glyphs, and I think it makes him more perhaps of an elder statesman in this community, is that he's had experiences face to face. He's had visualizations of these creatures. He's had other exchanges with them, rock throwing, things of this nature, with several different entities. And so he believes he's seen them face to face, yet that they also can appear as different things to different people. So on the episode, he details a situation where he's with a friend, he's walking down a trail, across the trail through the woods, he sees one. And he goes, "Hey man, look, there's Sasquatch." And his friend goes, "The dog?" So not too dissimilar to my situation in Eceti.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a case of manifesting perhaps what our own hopes, dreams, thoughts, indulgences are upon these straits, and having them to appear in the eye of the beholder? Or is it a situation where they can really appear as different things to different people? Who's to say? But it is a situation that, in terms of Sasquatch, personally, I was on a Sasquatch podcast probably a couple months ago, and this question always invariably comes up in terms of the hardline position of Sasquatch. As you know, as well as I do, there is a hardline perspective from a contingent of Sasquatch folks that go, he's a creature. He is flesh and blood. There's no other explanation. He's a real thing. And I think that position, that hardline position, reflects more about them as people than the phenomenon itself.
Right. What's funny is that mentioning that maybe it looks like a massive gorilla or one ape to one person and a dog to another. I had Mike Cleellen come on Midnight in the Desert with me recently, and a sort of his book, The Messengers.
Great book.
Oh my goodness, it's just chock full of goodies, and I'm sure his second one is too, because he really then just delves into all the stories that he's collected from other people. Like he says, he's the owl guy, right? Well, there's a story where 4 people driving in a car, they end up getting really tired. They had seen a light. It was kind of weird. Then they got really tired. They pulled over. They went to sleep. They all woke up. The quintessential bloody noses and headaches. They start driving. And all of a sudden, so there's a female driving, an adult male in the passenger seat, and 2 kids in the back. The driver and the 2 kids in the back start screaming because there's a massive, not a massive, strike that. There's an alien, like a classic gray alien, 3 to 4 feet tall, in the middle of the roads. They stop, and the guy is going, "What are you guys screaming about? It's just a massive owl. What is your like, he didn't get it. He's just like, why are you screaming?" So that story just jogged my memory of that from Mike's book, and I'm like, that's the same thing. I don't know what that means, but
I've wondered what Mike's interpretation of that Sasquatch story would be.
Yeah,
I would love to get his take on that. Maybe if he's listening or someone can ping him on this, I would love to get his take on that, because Mike's understanding of screen memories, right?
Yes.
And the stories that are told to us is fascinating, and such a deep look into the psychological element behind this. It cannot be, that cannot be excluded from any of the conversations in the paranormal.
Well, here's what trips me up about this side of it that we're talking about, as far as them, the communicating telepathically, and maybe they can go from flesh and blood to being invisible and having that more predator look that we've seen in a couple of the, of course, always questionable videos, because we don't know, is the fact that if they are that much of a higher being, then why do they do something so simplistic and maybe just monkey-like, like an animal-like action, like rock throwing, Not that that's to say that negates any of the other stuff, but, maybe when they're just in flesh and blood mode, that's just what they do. They act like big monkeys. So I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of those situations with the paranormal and people's experiences, right? Where you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? It's like the whole take with anomalous light activity and UFOs, right? Well, if they're so smart, why do they just have a light on all the time flying around?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, well, if you're trying not to be seen, well, you're not doing a very good job of that sometimes. Or, when you get into stories of like guys like Indrid Cold, right? Okay, so there's this guy in this suit, and he, kind of this stealthy, grinning, trying to be a non-threatening individual with some of these situations. That he swoops in on this flying apparatus that is like one of the scariest things you can see, and completely disarming. So there's a lot of, once you start going down this rabbit hole and you start going down like sort of John Keel territory, and you're going into screen memories, and you're going into interpretations of why certain things make sense. If I do believe anything, I believe that like going down a route where you're trying to make sense of some of this stuff is I would believe is a fool's errand.
Oh, it so is. It so is. I mean, here's a good example. When I was out at the Brown property, not only was there the light situation, but then there was the picture taken while we were outside. We were outside constantly the entire time unless we were asleep, which there wasn't much of because we were up super late, or, eating or going to the bathroom. Other than that, we're outside. There's a photo of what looks like half of a noggin with the brow ridge peeping over some bushes. And I posted this before, and I posted the entire description saying, this brush is not ground brush. This brush is 7 feet tall, and it can be proven because I myself was there, and Sarah was there. We both had to stand on a chair and then put our hands up, and then all you could see was like basically our hand. And everyone's like, oh, well, it's a groundhog or it's a deer. And I'm like, damn it. Did you not read the post? I was there myself. Like, I would never just, say, oh, well, that's ground brush, but it's a 7 foot tall damn brush, guys. Read the post. It was weird. And, that is something that was captured, but everybody goes, oh, it's a deer's ass, or it's a groundhog or a possum. Or I'm like, so it's a 7.5 foot tall groundhog? That's even weirder than a Sasquatch.
Right. Yeah.
That's even more terrifying.
Yeah. Right.
But I just think that no matter what comes up, it's kind of like one of those, like you said earlier, truth, so it kind of becomes to that point where Peter's at, he's just like, I don't really give a shit what people say because I was there. I know what happened. So that's fine. If you want to keep saying it's a damn groundhog and a ground brush, that's fine. It does become, like you said, a fool's errand to try to fight with anybody online or tell them something 16 times, and it just doesn't, it won't get through because they weren't there, and I get that.
Yeah, and that's a part of this entire industry that I don't envy anyone having to deal with. I have made a very strategic cop-out of that system with generally staying away from evidence and generally staying away from any really, really hardline evidence or investigation other than that of anecdotal and some historical investigation.
I hadn't posted that picture since it happened, and then the second I posted it, I remembered why it had been so damn long since I had posted it, and I'm like, why do I put myself through this? It's just not even worth it. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, people always have opinions, you know what I mean? And that's okay. But people also always have beliefs.
Yeah.
And it's inextricable from any of this. And that is part of the challenge. And it's a good challenge to have. You know what I mean? It's a good challenge for questions to be asked, for curiosities to be probed, for new ideas and paradigms to sometimes even be challenged through a way of proving themselves. But I think that when anyone starts getting too for certain about anything is where I start getting a little, a little shaky.
You mean the experts? The experts on things that are not yet proven, they are somehow experts. Yes, and they know for sure.
Yeah, and again, it's one of the situations I think that that position says more about the individual than the phenomenon of the work.
Absolutely. What is that? The title of that particular Euphomet episode is Sasquatch and the Secret Code, Jim?
I don't think so. I don't remember what it's called. The Sasquatch Code. Okay. That's what that episode is called.
Cool. Yeah. Easy to find. So if you guys want to learn more about that, please go there. And like he said, he gets to talk to Brian as well. So you'll probably want to hear more from Brian Bland up there in Canada. Okay, so last but not least, before I let you go, we're going to talk a little bit about you dining with a vampire.
Yeah, so this was a situation where, I was on the road for 3 weeks at this point. I show up in New Orleans, a place I'd never been before, and I'm aware that I'm going to be facing some energies and some specific topics or lifestyles that I've never experienced before in my life, and that is of voodoo and that of vampirism. So, what's interesting about this topic is that when I say vampire, it is one of those sort of inflammable terms in which folks go, well, what do you, like, not a real vampire, right? Like, not with, so I'll qualify that I go down there, I meet with Balthazar, who's a voodoo priest. He is an ordained minister, and he's the elder of the mystic House of Echoes, which is a house of vampires. Which is his vampire house.
Wow.
And what many don't believe is that, yes, vampires are real, and also vampires live in every city, every town, probably in the world. You may just not know it. A vampire is your neighbor. A vampire is perhaps the store clerk. You just don't know it.
Now let's maybe separate a couple things, because there are people that have an obsession with drinking blood, and that's called Reinfeld syndrome. Is that the same as a sanguinarian?
No, it isn't. Essentially, like, I believe sanguinarian is a technique for a certain type of vampire, and that's based on the type of technique they use to draw blood and what they feel about that. But essentially, the truth is about vampires is that just like any community, it's very wide ranging in terms of the type of personalities and opinions and beliefs. But for Balthazar, for example, he believes that he has a physiological condition that essentially he needs blood. He needs blood to survive. He needs blood to stay healthy. He needs blood to thrive, to get up in the morning. And so he drinks blood, human blood, straight from the source. He'll use his mouth, lips to skin. After making a few small incisions, he'll suck the blood out of donors. Now, there's other techniques for vampires. There's a phlebotomy technique, right? There's all sorts of different techniques for this, but there are communities all around the world that they're drinking real human bloods from donors. They range in terms of what their belief systems are, political affiliations, and level of secrecy. Balthazar's mystic House of Echoes is a completely open house of vampires. And in fact, they serve the community through a lot of different ways, through feeding the homeless, through putting on fund drives. They're very community involved and progressive in that way. And in that way, so is Balthazar. He's an open book. So he has several donors. They enter into a contractual obligation. They go through a rigorous amount of medical testing, both for him and for his donors. And he tests himself just for the sort of the clarity of mind for his donors to know that everything is only up and up. And they'll go through a process that's not too dissimilar to what we see like in the BDSM community, and these are folks that are involved in bondage, sadomasochism, and there's this whole process that is developed through fetishes and, sort of an agreement for essentially to be someone's property at some level to do like sort of sexual bidding for them. So there's people can look it up. I'm not an expert at it, but essentially it's not too dissimilar to contracts that are like that, in that there is now there's other houses, and most houses are not open. They are very secretive. And, their beliefs, their agendas, very secretive. Balthazar also doesn't believe vampirism is his spirituality. It's not his religion. He believes vampirism is a physical act, and it's essentially a little bit of a ritual. It's a little bit of a rite, right? There's a responsibility and there's a respect to it. But voodooism is his religion, and that's the religion he practices. So going into the situation, never meeting Balthazar before, he has my other friends. I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't. The first thing I did when I got to New Orleans is I went into a witchcraft shop and I, got some rocks and I got some different omens for protection and for kind of clarity, because I was burnt out at that time. You know what I mean? I'd been on the road for so long, and I was collecting so many stories that I felt, okay, well, this is definitely the time to have, a meeting with a vampire is when I'm at my weakest.
Were you slightly worried that Balthazar would be like, why are you carrying these protected rocks? And, why do you feel like you need that? Or was that...
Oh, he didn't see it. No, he didn't see it.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were kept close to my person.
But his religion is voodoo. So, I would be worried that one of the high priestesses or something would be there and be like, yeah, he's carrying some protective stuff because he's really afraid of us. So it probably doesn't work like that. I'm just being an asshole.
Yeah, no, but there's truth to that, like what you're saying. And I did tell him that, like, hey, I got these crossed coffin nails. I'm not quite sure what they do, but they're a good idea. But no, Balthazar, at the end of the day, I think when people listened to that episode, they saw that they were able to ask themselves a really serious question. And it's a question that I don't think they were expecting when they're going to that episode. And I think the question is this: will there be a day when there are civil rights protests, there is community action and advocacy for the respect and the dignity of the vampire community and how it's seen in the public and pop culture, right? So you have vampires who are a legitimate marginalized community at this point of real humans. These aren't people that turn into bats. And of course, maybe some of this was built on tradition through fantasy, but this fantasy has become real life at this point. And these are real people that are living, as this is their identity, essentially. So, is there a point in time where we look back at movies like Blade and go like, man, that's disgusting. Why did we do that? Why were we able to do that? Just like slay these people because they're vampires. That's completely wrong, And I think that's a question that I heard a lot after the episode. And it was one that people weren't expecting to ask themselves.
So what about the actual dining experience with, did he actually drink any blood in front of you?
He didn't. And I think he would have if I really pushed him to. I did meet some of his donors, and I've seen footage of him drinking blood and interviews with his donors, so I had enough evidence to know that it was legit. And I had done enough research to know that he was the real deal. And people had asked me when I went for that taping, like, hey, are you watching him? Are you gonna be a donor? Like, are you gonna try to And I was like, yeah, I think there's a line.
Yeah, for your research, right? In your show.
There's a line I think yeah, okay, I'll just to a certain amount, I'll dip into this. But no, it was never really discussed. I do remember I asked him, well, can I interview one of your donors, and then maybe if they're ready, they can donate to you. Mm-hmm. And that was discussed, but it just never occurred. I never felt like it needed to happen. And I felt that me doing it at that point was almost too sensational. That the story didn't need what am I going to do? You know what I mean? Like the sucking. And although it was my first intent to capture that, I felt that for myself, I didn't need to go that far. Yeah. And I wanted to be respectful too. I wanted to be respectful of his relationship with his donors. And I felt that if I approached it in that way and I showed him that level of respect about what his ritual is, about what his life is like, and not approach it in a voyeuristic way, that he would open up to me about things that were much deeper than that act. And he did. Very honest and open about his entire life, not just vampirism. And I think a part of that had to do with me not coming from it with that approach, like, hey, just shut up and suck some blood for me.
I mean, does he have a personal relationship or a sexual relationship with any of his donors beyond taking the blood?
He doesn't, not in terms of sexual relationship. But that doesn't happen in the vampire community. And I think that I think he would say that there's probably an entire contingent that's what it's built upon. What's interesting about the vampire community that's not dissimilar from any other sort of fringe community is that there's a level of like, okay, well, we're doing the real stuff over here. And then there's these posers over here.
Right.
And these are the ones,
totally.
Balthazar is not the guy to like walk around in like frills and stuff like that. He was wearing an Avengers shirt. Like
right.
He's not the pomp and circumstance interview with a vampire guy.
Yeah.
But those do exist, and I would say that those are probably a small part of the community, but they are out there, and they're essentially the most peacocking vocal versions of vampires, I'd say.
I would say that the lips to the skin, not that it shocked me when you said that, but I haven't really heard of that so much. What I usually hear when someone's talking about drinking, it sounds like it's more of like an IV situation drained into, some sort of a vessel, and then they drink it. So I wasn't really maybe expecting that part of it as far as, that's how he and his followers are getting the blood.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily expecting that either. I do think that after talking to him, that it may be the most common way to do it, and that it's not very known. And that was a part of the conversation that was really interesting to me. The realization that, again, this is a community that is rather large, and that there are vampire houses all over the place. And usually we just don't know about it. And it's what I like about doing Euphomet, and it's what I like about embedding myself in these communities, is that the world is stranger than fiction. The world is a comic book. The world is a fantasy. And that anything that you could think of in terms of character types and belief systems and radical action are things that actually happen in real life. And so some of this has completely ruined me on even enjoying some movies and TV and stuff, because it's just like, well, yeah, that's kind of cool, but like the real version is like way cooler.
Right.
So, you name it in terms of just sort of, especially the paranormal communities that are out there, or the occult or the esoteric communities that are out there. It's so tapestry of our humanity, and this stuff is so rich, and there's so much diversity and weirdness.
That Balthazar, that's fascinating about him. That is just okay. Last question, and then I'll ask you what's coming up for Euphomet, because I know you still got stuff going on. How much blood does he usually drink on a daily basis?
Oh, that's a good question. And he tells me for sure, and I know it's in the episode, but I can't remember how much at this moment in time. I think it's like a quart or two. It's a lot.
Wow.
He drinks a lot in just one session. And that's just one session. And sometimes he'll do it every day. Sometimes he'll do it every other day, maybe 3 times a week. It just kind of depends on what his sort of virality is. I think that's a word.
If it's not, it's a sexy word. I think it's a word.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, attributed to a vampire. Makes sense.
Because I've heard it's a extreme conspiracy theory, but that people like the royal family and the Queen of England, that they get the blood of young people and they have it transfused. Of course, I don't think it's the situation where they're actually putting lips to skin. It is, I don't know, but that it's basically their fountain of youth. So,
what's interesting about that is that I'm doing a little bit of studying on things like vril right now, things like life forces, right? And there are lots of different bodily systems that essentially, depending on the culture and the belief, have some sort of energy attributed to them. That whatever ruling society there is, whatever secret society, seems to latch onto this idea that they can drain this energy or expel this energy from these different humanist body parts or juices or what have you. And so I think the stories about the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and the elite, right, are kind of you can't separate that with it. And I think that it's a very deep well. But you also say it's the same thing for read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Read between the lines in some of that. It's not too dissimilar. And I think those who are in power are looking usually for more power, and what are ways that they gain that. So I don't know. There's something maybe to it.
I mean, if you go on one of these adventures for Euphomet, and I have an idea so far, and so does everybody else listening. And you may not know until you get into the situation, but surely there's got to be a list of things you're just like, nope, not going to do this, or this. Like you said, you have to have certain boundaries and lines that you just can't cross, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for one, for your physical safety, and for two, for your mental safety. And also I'm a fairly principled person. I have a lot of I live by a pretty strong code. I've been married forever. I'm straight edge. I have I like to approach the world, and I certainly don't want to trade any of that for any of the more esoteric knowledge I perhaps possess from diving even deeper into some of this stuff. Because, if anyone can take a precursory glance of any of the occult studies, right, which loops directly into the paranormal, I believe, or metaphysical, and it's ripe with all sorts of experiences one should not probably engage with ever.
Yeah.
Again, for both their physical safety and their mental safety, and some would argue even their spiritual safety. And so that is a concern for me. There would be times where I would enter into a situation and I would be nervous about it, and I would get a hold of Tim. I would get a hold of John Tenney. I would talk to the Newkirks. I would say, hey, how do you think I should prepare for this? What is there something I should do? And it's interesting because the resounding answer that I get back usually is, well, make sure your intent is right. And to me that's make sure you're coming at it from the right side, and that can be a burden to, I think, because I think it's easy to misalign your intent with some of this stuff. And I think that can gain results. That can give you, for example, activity, right? But I don't know if it's the best way to do it. I don't know if a negative or sensational sort of exploitation of these unknown things, I don't know if that's the right way, because I know if I was in that position, I wouldn't want that,
Well, and I think that's why it's okay to be a collector of stories, but you don't always need to be trying to insert yourself into every story and have every experience that you're covering.
Yeah, and that's a great point you brought up, because what was really funny and interesting about Euphomet is that despite Obscura, which contains some of my travel logs and stuff, like none of the show is about me, which is great. So I appropriately insert myself as a narrator and a lens through certain things to add context, but it's always about the person I feature.
Yeah.
And this opportunity here, this is my opportunity to talk about myself. Like your show right now, like this is about me. So that's I can tell these stories. The stories I told you today, those weren't stories really featured in the episode at all, because those were my own stories, and those are personal to me, and those are mine. Whoever that featured guest, whoever that episode is, it's not calling for that.
Right.
Like the story is calling for whatever is specific to that story. And I think so often storytellers, we have this urge to insert ourselves, to the really big importance of what our anecdotal circumstance is. And I think that's fine, but you have to, I think there's a point where you have to learn to separate yourself from it as well. And I think it's, you use this information as a tool. You use this information for context for you to better illustrate and better tell that story. But sometimes that's all you get out of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And at some points, like you said, you do have the chance to say, okay, well, I was story, but this actually and this happened to me. And that's cool. I mean, it is cool to have those experiences. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of people feel like if they don't have some kind of a personal connection to the story, then I should be covering this because I can't talk about it. Well, that's not true, because there's plenty of people that can, and other people that will identify with that.
Oh, exactly. I mean, 100%. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of very foreign topics that I approach and situations I get myself into that, although they're relatively safe and fit within my confines, is something that I think is a good challenge for me to be a part of.
Yeah.
Are challenges,
Right.
Are situations and constructs that I'm like, well, this is something I'm completely unfamiliar with. But I think that's where understanding comes from, and that's where the greater appreciation for everyone's experiences come from, because it's, these stories are important and these experiences are important, even if we can't have definitive evidence of anything. I don't know if that matters as much as the respect for the experiences that we have, because they certainly mean something. And the more and more I do this, they really are trying to tell us something. But yeah, I hope Euphomet is an example of that.
So besides Frill, what else is coming up for Euphomet? Is there anything that you wanted to kind of bring up, or is it all kind of be a surprise?
I mean, no, right now we're just doing Euphomet Obscura, and we ended the first season with episode 18, and we're on episode 3 or 4 right now of Obscura. And Euphomet Obscura is really a look back at season 1. And with that, there was so much extra. There was so much of these episodes. When we produce these things, again, I was staying with these people sometimes for as long as. So we had a lot of tape, we had a lot of stories, and we had a lot of experiences, and it was all boots on the ground. So, there were certain episodes for the first season of Euphomet that some of the tape could have generated several episodes,
right,
essentially. And so that's the process we're in right now, while we're looking for and securing funding for a season 2, a budget that would allow me to travel and get back out there on the road. We're essentially going back through the tape and going, man, this story, we didn't get to tell this before because it didn't fit that one narrative. It's also an opportunity to go back and look at the history and some more of the notable historical experiences that accompanied our guests or were related to the phenomenon. So, for example, the first episode of Obscura, I went back and found experiences I had with Greg and Dana. And these were experiences that we had out in Point Pleasant. And I was able to go back and really retell the story of the Mothman and of Keel's experiences and Indrid Cold. And I used some historical tape, and I was, of Darren Berger and his experience with Cold. And so it's really an opportunity for me to combine a bunch of different things. Some research of my own, some travelogue sort of experiences of my own. I can inject a little bit more of my own adventure into this now after I have time to reflect on it and improperly able to, I don't know, essentially communicate these stories within the constructs of a narrative. And it's fun. It's really fun producing this. And then eventually, we'll produce a season 2. We also have a Patreon right now, which is really interesting and fun because I'm able to go back through and re-release the original series. And so Euphomet, the original series, which Shannon, you were a part of for several episodes, and we did some fun stuff. Those are going to be available for the first time. A new classic episode every week on Patreon. The last one was a great conversation I had with Ann Jersh, the future life progressionist. The week before that was Ryan Sprague and his first appearance on the show. And it was in Shannon, like Ryan's first appearance on my show was 2015.
Oh my
believe that?
gosh.
It's just time is just like completely flying by. So
there's no way I would have guessed that it would have been 2015 the first time you had Ryan on. That's crazy.
And so and I think you were 2015 as well. I'm almost positive you were.
That's unreal.
So, this has been really interesting going back through putting those episodes up and also releasing some new just one-on-one conversations too. So, and it allows me to like kind of stretch my wings and tell these stories in a bunch of different ways. And it really helps me commit a very focused documentary approach to all the Euphomet mainline stuff. So
if one goes to Patreon, you can type in Euphomet and find it that way, or?
I would suggest going to patreon.com/Euphomet. And that'll get you right where you need to go.
Okay, and again, that is EUPHOMET. And one more time, Jim, before I let you go, let everybody know where to find you and Euphomet.
Yeah, you can find Euphomet at euphomet.com. It on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find it there. You can find Euphomet on social media at Euphomet all across the board. And you can find me, which is a little bit more of the active account. You can find me at It's Jim Perry on Twitter and Instagram. And it's probably the best way to keep track of the show is just follow me.
Well, Jim, it was so good to finally talk to you again. Thank you so much for your time today. And honestly, I'm trying to put together a couple roundtables. So, heck, maybe we can get Tim in on one. I've never spoken to Tim before. He's a fascinating person to chat with. So maybe I can rustle up Sprague and you, and maybe we can get Tim on board too and just have a roundtable about all sorts of goodies.
Always for you. Always love chatting.
Thanks, Jim. You too. All right, well, I won't take up any more of your time. You and the lovely Seattle area, have a good night.
All right, thanks so much, Shannon. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little file. Buddha says, forget it. There's nothing. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. And then there's a real you. And that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the cohorts to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. quite divided on this. They will say, no, we don't believe literally in reincarnation. That after your funeral, you will suddenly become somebody different, living somewhere else. They will say reincarnation means this, that if you sitting here now are really convinced that you're the same person who walked in at the door half an hour ago, you're being reincarnated. If you are liberated, you will understand that you're not. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. There is only the present. That's the only real you that there is. The Zen master Dogen put it in this way. He said, the spring does not become the summer. First there is summer, and then there is spring. When you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and he says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.